I'd like to start and see if there are any responses overall to the story about the swordsman and the cat. I think we have to agree it's a very unusual type of reading. Any thoughts on what you read at this point?
Is the was the main wise cat in the story supposed to be a Zen practitioner? Is that
Yes, yes,
okay?
it's all about Zen. hmm But Zen, being in Japan, also has a certain taste that is related to the culture. Other comments at this point? Well, you might be tempted to think it's just a story for children, but this is serious stuff. It's adapted from a 17th century book on swordplay, and it was written by a master who is obviously going to be using it for training his students. So this is not for children. This is for adults who are engaged in learning a very demanding kind of skill, which also involves life and death. So let's see what we got here. We could also talk about it as an art form, the art of fighting rats. And this is related to Bushido, which in Japan is the warrior way. Bushido. Do is actually from Tao in Chinese philosophy. Bushi is the warrior. So the way of the warrior, but it's not just about Zen. There is a Buddhist epistemology. So that's what's laid out in the story. So, how do you make use of your knowledge and wisdom and apply them in your skill as a swordsman? But it also involves Taoist metaphysics, and that's a very big component, not something that was evident in our previous readings. And although very often people miss this, there's a influence from Chinese Confucianism. So the ethical stance is Confucian. So in the text that I set out to you, there are parenthetical remarks. Some of them are put in by Suzuki, and the ones with the double brackets I added to try to clarify some of the terminology, which is, you can indicate it to be Confucian or Taoist, although in the original story that wasn't necessary. What's also quite remarkable about it is that the most important characters in the story are not just cats, but they're female cats. And they are the ones who are practicing monkey Buddhism, self reliance. And it's the other cats who think they know so much who have to learn from these cats, one of whom does not even appear in the story except by hearsay. So that's very important. So this also brings to the foreground the application of Buddhism, particularly in East Asian cultures. And we already mentioned the aspect of the art form. So when you look at a story like this, I think it's very difficult to see, particularly Zen Buddhism, as a religion. It's not a religious doctrine, it's more like a way of living. And it also seems rather contradictory that samurai in Japan became very dedicated practitioners of Zen philosophy, but it was seen to be very helpful, if not essential, to being an excellent and successful swordsman. And again, we cannot avoid the life and death aspect here. I don't think that the historical Buddha would have imagined that this was the case. Not that he didn't think that people who were in a military profession couldn't benefit from Buddhism, but to see this as part of the training methodology. that was consciously incorporated. And that's one of the things that we're going to try to figure out as we look at the story. So it is about Zen philosophy, but it's also enriched by Taoism and Confucianism. So this particular story was included in a very influential and very large text called Zen and Japanese Culture. And it looks at the way in which Zen Buddhism has influenced the development of Japanese culture, particularly in the so-called medieval period. And it talks about painting and poetry and gardening and flower arranging. And in addition, it cites this particular story. And what is it that Suzuki is trying to tell us about? Now, this is the same Suzuki who was the Zen teacher of John Cage. As I mentioned, he was very influential in terms of bringing the message of Buddhism, but specifically Japanese Zen Buddhism to America over 100 years ago. So what is his understanding of Zen? Zen discipline is simple, direct, self-reliant, so that's the monkey Buddhism part, self-denying, that is not as an ascetic kind of lifestyle, but denying the ego self. So that's quite consistent with Buddhist philosophy from the beginning. The fighter is to be always single-minded, not to be encumbered in any possible way, be it physical, emotional, or intellectual. And I think you might see how that fits in with what we've been discussing all along, that you shouldn't have attachment to your physicality, your emotionality, or even your intellectual ability. Because the physical and the emotional usually are addressed, for example, by monastics. But as we saw, for example, in the Diamond Sutra, the intellectual encumberments, those are the most difficult for many practitioners like Subhuti to get beyond. And so this is part of the training. And the Diamond Sutra was also one of the favored texts of Chan, but also Zen Buddhism. Any comments or questions about this statement? So this is what we can expect to see illustrated in the story about these cats. So the problem, there's this furious rat. So most of the content of the story I've actually put into the PowerPoint with just a few sections that are not here. So basically the entire story is here. So this rat has taken up residence in the home of a swordsman. So there's the Bushido or samurai connection. He has a pet cat, but not only does the pet cat fail to catch the rat, but he gets bitten by the rat. So that's why it's not just a rat, but a furious rat. And so he calls in, as the story says, neighboring cats noted for their skill and courage in catching rats. And so this is a chance for them to test their skills, but they also fail. Finally, the swordsman gets his sword out and tries to kill the rat himself, and he also fails. So in terms of what we've been discussing all semester, we could diagnose the common liability that the cats and the swordsman are all suffering from. And this is one of the most important lessons the story is trying to present to us. It's a fixation on task-driven attention. So we talked about the stimulus-driven and the task-driven. So they're totally focused on killing the rat. But that, although it seems the obvious thing to do, is not the most effective way to deal with the problem. What they need to do is to shift their attention to the stimulus-driven, and that's where Zen training and discipline comes in. So again, that's what we're looking for. So there's this whole new element that is introduced into the story that is not originally from Buddhism, but comes from Chinese culture, which was extremely influential on the development of Japanese culture. And many of you might be familiar with a version of this symbol. Usually people refer to it as the yin-yang symbol, but originally is called in China the Taiji, the Great Ultimate. And it represents the metaphysical foundation of Chinese culture. In the oldest text that we have, dating back thousands of years, which is the I Ching, usually translated as the classic of changes. So I is change and Jing is classic. So in the intertwining of the light and the dark, we actually have the relationship, dynamic relationship between two forms of energy that are the underpinning of the cosmos. One is yin and one is yang. This particular picture, I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but it's a close-up from a photo that I took at a Chinese Taoist temple some years ago. And it's a rather unusual way of presenting the Taiji. It's a little bit more fluid, and we're also supposed to assume that it's in motion. So it's constantly cycling, one changing into the other. So yin is represented by the black, and the values there are receptivity, waiting, and this is associated what we've been talking about as stimulus-driven attention. So you wait, you are receptive, you're using the environmental stimulus in order to decide how you need to act in a given situation. The yang is the white, and as you notice, there is a little bit of the white in the black, and there's a little bit of black in the white, so they are not completely separable. So the yang energy is associated with assertion and strength. So that's the obvious power, whereas yin is the hidden power. And as we'll see in the story, it's that hidden power that actually is the most effective. So this assertion, this strength, this pushing the envelope, this is task-driven attention. And although it can be very helpful in extreme cases, as at this one with the furious rat, it actually doesn't work. So here we can kind of visualize what's happening here. The surface, which is where we have yang assertiveness, so that seems to be, that strength, that power, that seems to be what makes the samurai successful. And all of these cats are going to claim that they have great skills. But in fact, it's the cats that are underneath the surface, the ones with the hidden power that are associated with the yin receptivity, they're the ones who ultimately are effective in getting rid of the rat problem. And I also stuck the little samurai guy here too. So there's the rat. And what does the rat represent? Well, maybe it's the egos. Maybe our task-driven attention is trying to eliminate the delusion of the Atman. That's not really dealt with in the story, but we can imagine that might be it. And we can also use the 4 different stages of competence that we've talked about. So the most superficial, unconscious incompetence, somebody who doesn't even know what they don't know, is represented by the black cat, the one who pushes forward to tell his story at the beginning. So this is all about, again, these are Chinese terminology taken from Taoism. Wei. Wei literally means to act. So that's that yang, moving forward, taking the initiative. It's discussed in the story as conscious decision-making. And in Taoism, this is associated with the cunning intellect. So that's the part of your brain that thinks it's in control and is able to solve all of its problems. So it's not just confident, but at least in these cases, overconfident. Confident in terms of this cognitive set of methods and skills. Kind of like, I got this because I've trained for this. I know how to do this. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to go kill that rat. What is pointed out in the story is that when you push the envelope, sometimes it pushes back. So that kind of approach very often can be successful. But again, when we're in an extreme case, there is more than a slight possibility that you're going to fail, as these cats did. So the black cat doesn't even know what he doesn't know. Okay? Everybody get a sense of that. So it's really about a mindset, a cognitive set. And the next cat that we're going to be
I just want to say that I have seen that picture before of the ice like
iceberg.
iceberg, yeah, and then yeah, like I had seen the concept of it before, almost like entailing like levels of consciousness. I had seen it before.
Yes, I think it's extremely helpful because we do have a tendency to kind of fixate on what's on the surface, what's obvious. We can go back to Bodhidharma students. They just tell the obvious teaching that they had picked up from Bodhidharma, but they don't have any depth in terms of trying to express their own insights. And so that would be the skin. So it's very superficial. It's not totally wrong.
I love that pic. Yeah, I love that picture.
So everybody get a sense of the problem this black cat has. He thinks he knows everything, but as it turns out, there's quite a bit he needs to learn. So I put the tiger cat kind of in between, so not completely unconscious about incompetence, so having some consciousness of his incompetence, but still at a fairly superficial level. The same seems to be true with the next cat, who's a little deeper down. So they have kind of a concept or a thought covering, so they are more informed than the black cat, but they still have quite a bit to learn or unlearn, let's say, in terms of their fixation on the task-driven attention. So the cat, the female cat who turns out to be their teacher, Zen teacher, is much further down, and I would put her at the level of conscious competence. So that she knows things that the other cats do not know and is passing on that knowledge to them. And then the last cat is the one who is talked about by what they call the veteran cat, but never makes an appearance. And that's why I just have a drawing of that cat, because we don't get to see that cat. All we know it's referred to as the sleeping cat. And so this is actually the deepest level. This is the unconscious competence. And as we'll see, when she's questioned about her understanding of how to deal with rats, she doesn't have anything to say. So she does not even try to verbalize what she understands. So this would be yin receptivity, which is the approach that is recommended in Chinese Taoist philosophy. So there's a melding here of Chinese Taoism and Buddhism. And this is what we call wu wei, action without artificial action. So it's not passivity. You do something, but you're not acting from the standpoint of your task-driven attention. It is a mind that is unattached, not detached, because if it were detached, it couldn't be stimulus-driven, but not attached to the task of eliminating the rat. And because of that, it's kind of the Zen secret that allows you to be successful even in extreme cases. So that mind of no mind, is a dynamic response to changing conditions. This is the lived experience that the female cats bring to the problem of the rat. Okay? So that's kind of like the background of this whole story. Oops, do we have a chat here? So I Ching is the Chinese word for the text. So the difference in the spelling has to do with transliteration problems. So it's the same text, Y-I or I. So the I Ching is the pinyin, and the I with the CH, that is the an older transliteration way of presenting Chinese language. Yeah, so it's the same text. Very popular in Japan as well as in China. So the cat that eventually is successful is really the last resort. It's the neighborhood rat catcher. So she comes in and she has a kind of a reputation. And this is what the story says. From the standpoint of the swordsman, the cat did not look in any way especially different from the other cats that had been invited to fight the rat. That kind of brings my mind back to the opening paragraph of the Diamond Sutra. If you're looking at that scene from a distance, the Buddha looks like any of the other monks because they're all dressed exactly the same. And they're all doing the same thing, getting themselves ready in the morning and going out and collecting their food for the day. But there is something extremely different about the historical Buddha compared to the other monks. And there's also something very different about this cat. Notice it's the cat, capital C for cat. On the surface, you wouldn't know. So you have to delve again deeper. So the swordsman did not think very much of her, but let her go into the room where the rat was located. The cat went in quietly and slowly. So those are yin methodologies, not running in there, rushing in there, being assertive, but using yin energy, as if she were not cognizant of any unusual scene in the room. So she's not gearing herself up. She's just doing something in a perfectly natural way. But that kind of presence has a very immediate effect on the rat, who becomes extremely terrified. The cat almost nonchalantly went for the rat and came out carrying it by the neck. Now, the story doesn't tell us for sure, but based on what's coming up, I think it's likely the case that she does not kill that the rat. She just removes the problem, that is that rat inside that house, and then just gets it out. So all the other cats were intent on killing the rat. And because of her Zen philosophy, that is not what she's about. That's not how she sees her role. She doesn't have the task of exterminating rats. So then they decide to have this victory celebration. Apparently it's held by a nice dinner held by the samurai. And all the cats who failed are asked to come, and they're there to honor the cat. And they have an ulterior motive, as they say. We all wish to divulge your secrets for our benefit. So they want to be her, and they're hoping that she can tell them how they can improve their performance. And then this part I also like because it's very young. Before that, let us see how much we all know about the art of fighting rats. So they're all failures, and yet they can't resist the temptation to actually brag about themselves. So yeah, maybe I fail, but oh, I'm really very good at this. So first we have the black cat. Obviously, these are not the real cats. I just, went online and I got some pictures, and I kind of like that squinty look that he's got. And he volunteers to go first. So he's really a pushy dude, so we can see. So that is consistent with his unconscious incompetence. And so he's just going to, in a way, provide excuses for himself for his failure. I was born in a family reputed for its skill in the art. Since my kitten days, I have trained myself with a view to becoming a great rat catcher. So he's got this task-driven thing really strong. I am able to leap over a screen as high as 7 feet. I know how to squeeze myself through a tiny hole, which allows a rat only. I am proficient in performing all kinds of acrobatics. I am also clever at making the rats think that I am sound asleep, but I know how to strike at them as soon as they come within my reach. Even those running over the beam cannot escape me. So it sounds like, wow, he's great, but he failed. And his explanation, it is really a shame that I had to retreat before that old rat today. So that rat was more than he could handle. Any questions about that? I'm sure you all know somebody like this, always ready to tell you how great they are, even when they failed. Unable to admit really that they're failed. So he actually is blaming the rat. It's that rat.
I think someone does have a question. It's like on the chat box.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks. If I can get that done here. Oh, that's the one about the I Ching, the title of the text. Yes. It's the same thing. Yijing is the same as Iching. Yeah. It's just a different transliteration. So everybody got a sense of this kind of personality. I'm sure you all know this person or this kind of cat. So now we have the analysis that comes from the veteran cat. So each of them is going to, in their own way, brag about their performance or lack of performance. And then she steps in and is going to provide them with some helpful suggestions. And in this way, we can also learn something about what is missing in their mindfulness training. So she says, what you have learned is the technique of the art. Your mind is ever conscious of planning how to combat the opponent. So very task-driven. The reason why the ancient masters devised the technique is to acquaint us with the proper method of accomplishing the work. And the method is naturally simple and effective, implying all the essential points of the art. So she's not putting down the methodology, but there's more to it than just, let's say, the map, the game plan. So those who follow the master fail to grasp his principle and are too busily occupied with improving their technical cleverness and manipulatory skill. So they're going for the superficial techniques and they're not training their mind, because the trained mind is what actually makes the difference between success and failure. So the end is achieved, that is, they acquire the technique, and cleverness attains its highest efficiency. But what does it all amount to? Cleverness is an activity of the mind, no doubt, but it must be in accordance with the way. So the way here is Tao, which is obviously not a Buddhist concept, but again, comes from Chinese culture. And the term Tao is used by Taoist philosophy, by Confucian philosophy, and eventually when the Buddhists arrived, they also incorporated this notion of Tao. Sometimes it was a way to translate the word Dharma. It's the way things are. So there's something more. Just to be clever, just to have the skill set of the cunning intellect is not enough, because you have to harmonize with the way, with the natural way. So when the latter, the way, is neglected and mere cleverness or cunning intellect is aimed at, it diverges and is apt to be abused. This is to be remembered well in the art of fighting. So it's not that the black cat hasn't learned anything, but they haven't learned enough. They need more. So this is, again, within the context of Taoist philosophy, known as Wei. So that's that action, that assertiveness associated with yang energy. And this is the character. And it shows a human hand on an elephant. So in the original version, it looked like an elephant on its side. So you can see how it's been abstracted. So you can see the trunk in the front here, and then you have the four legs of the elephant, and then the big body, and then on top we have the human hand. Some years ago when I was discussing this, one of the students brought in this picture, which actually is from the Reader magazine, the San Diego magazine, and it shows a human hand on an elephant. Now, it's a very interesting image to use for action. So the human being is trying to act on something in nature, in this case, something very big. And I think it really reflects this unconscious incompetence, because as the veteran cat was explaining, sometimes you can get the elephant to do what you want, but sometimes you can't. Elephants are very large and very powerful compared to human beings. So if we envision the elephant like the way, you think you're controlling the way, but it's only because the way doesn't fight back. But you never really had that elephant under your control. The elephant's doing what the elephant does. And you mistakenly assume that you are in control. And that's the limitation of the black cat. There's a lot more that he needs, and he needs to get outside of this explicit assertiveness mode of trying to control things from his own ego standpoint. And I think you can see he's very egotistical. Everybody get a sense of that. So it's not originally Buddhist terminology, but it can be used to explain what Buddhism is also talking about in terms of the single separate ego mindset, which is deluded, thinking that it is in control of all the causes and conditions in the world, instead of the need to harmonize with them. Okay. So that brings us to the tiger cat, who is specifically identified as male. So the gender is very important because of the yin and the yang energies at work here. The yang energy became associated with the male and the yin energy with the female. So it's not accidental that the two cats who represent the yin energy are both females in the story. So this next cat is explaining his technique. So to my mind, what is important is in the art of fighting is the spirit. So in Japanese, that's called ki, and in Chinese, it's chi. The old transliteration is chi, and then pinyin is with a q. I have long trained myself in its cultivation and development. So the tiger cat knows that it's not simply about the external skills, but there's something about the mental training that is necessary. So I am now in possession of the strongest spirit which fills up heaven and earth. Well, that's not very modest, is it? When I face an opponent, my overawing spirit is already on him. So I'm not just using my physical force, I'm using my spiritual force, my chi energy. So my overawing spirit is on him. Victory is on my side, even prior to actual combat. So that energy that he brings to the fight ensures his success. I have no conscious scheme as to the use of technical skill. And that's what the black cat does. He has this conscious scheme going on all the time. But it comes out spontaneously according to change of situation. So this sounds like it's moving in the direction of stimulus driven, but in a very conscious way, even though he's conscious of being unconscious. So if a rat should be running over a beam, I would just gaze at him intensely, and he is sure to fall by himself from the height and be my prisoner. So he can stare down rats running over a beam. But that old mysterious rat moved along without leaving any shadow. The reason is beyond me. So again, the story is, well, I'm really good at this and I'm very successful, but this case is unusual. So it wasn't my fault. It's just this mysterious old rat. So staring us in the face there, tiger cat. So this is implicit way. So the cat's trying to make it look, oh no, I'm not going by my conscious skill set. I understand that that's too superficial, but in fact, there still is that assertion. We can feel that assertion. So she says, you know how to make the most of your psychic powers, but the very fact of your being conscious of it works against you. So conscious of your unconscious at work, that's a problem. Your strong psyche stands opposed to the opponents. So there's that dualistic self versus other. And you can never be sure of yours being stronger than his, for there is always a possibility of its being surpassed. So you've been lucky so far. You haven't met any energetic rats. You've always met rats that had a lower energy level than you, but in this case, you were outdone. So you may feel as if your active, vigorous psyche were filling the universe, but it is not the spirit itself. It is no more than its shadowy image. So you mistake this shadow for the actual spirit. And here she refers to a Confucian text, Chinese Confucian Mencius. It may resemble Mencius's Kozen no Ki, but in reality, it is not. So there's a passage in this Confucian text that talks about this overarching spirit. Mencius Qi, as we know, is bright and illuminating, and for this reason full of vigor, whereas yours gains vigor owing to conditions. So you don't have consistent high energy. If you're in a situation where there's a low energy rat, then you've got high enough energy to be successful. So because of this difference in origin, there is a difference in its operation. The one is a great river incessantly flowing. That would be the real overarching spiritual energy. The other is a temporary flood after a heavy rainfall, soon exhausted. So the tiger cat is a temporary flood. The energy is there, but you can't always count on the energy to always be there. Does everybody see the difference between these two cats? They're both self-involved, but the second cat makes a point of saying, well, but I'm not really just limited to myself. I'm connecting to this energy of the cosmos. Or at least he thinks he's connecting to the energy of the cosmos. But the fact that he failed in this case with this rat shows that he's not quite where he thinks he is. So that's why I put him at the level of conscious incompetence. So she continues, a desperate rat often proves stronger than an attacking cat. It has been cornered, the fight is for life and death, and the desperate victim harbors no desire to escape unhurt. Its mental attitude defies every possible danger which it may come upon. Its whole being incarnates the fighting chi, and no cats can withstand its steel-like resistance. So when there is no way out for the rat, and it's fighting for its life, it can have that overawing energy that will take down even a cat. And that's what happened here. Okay, so that leads us to the gray cat, who's a little deeper down and still at the level of conscious incompetence, because there's still something that's missing. As the story says, the gray cat advanced quietly. So seems to be much closer to the yin energy, not that pushing forward. As you tell us, a psyche, however strong, is always accompanied by its shadow. And the enemy is sure to take advantage of the shadow. So if you're not completely in harmony with the cosmos, then there still is that ego that creates the shadow. I have for a long time disciplined myself in this way, not to overawe the enemy, not to force a fight, but to assume a yielding and conciliatory attitude. So this is a cat who understands the power of yin energy, but the statement reveals the problem, assuming a yielding and conciliatory attitude. So the cat is not naturally yielding and conciliatory, but assuming the appearance of yieldingness. So understands the yin energy is powerful, but is not really there yet in terms of naturally being yin energy. So when the enemy proves strong, I just look yielding and simply follow his movements. I act like a curtain surrendering itself to the pressure of a stone thrown at it. Even a strong rat finds no means to fight me. But the one we had to deal with today has no parallel. So again, I'm really good at this. Explain away the failure. It's just because this is such an unusual rat. It refused to submit to my psychical overpowering and was not tempted by my manifestations of a yielding psyche. It was a most mysterious creature, the like of which I have never seen in my life. So basically the same story, but a little bit closer to the secret Zen of yin. So let's see the analysis. So this is the pretense of Wu-Wei. And that's why we still have this conscious incompetence. So taking that Wei energy, the assertiveness, and then using Wu, which means it's not the negation of action. It literally means without, but without artificial action. Excuse me. So the gray cat is pretending to be yin. And that's where the problem comes in. Hasn't quite gotten to the Wu-Wei yet. So here's the analysis. What you call a yielding psyche is not in harmony with nature. It is man-made. I guess we should say cat-made, but that's what the translation is. It is a contrivance worked out in your conscious mind. So all the problems begin in the mind. When you try by means of this to crush the opponent's positive, impassioned, attacking psyche, he is quick enough to detect any sign of psychic wavering which may go on in your mind. So you've left yourself open to being that weakness of that conscious mind. The yielding psyche, thus artificially invoked, produces a certain degree of muddiness and obstruction in your mind. Your mind is not clearly focused. It is not mindful, completely mindful. So this is sure to interfere with the acuteness of perception and agility of action. You're not fully there. Your mind is still wandering, at least to a small extent. For nature feels impeded in pursuing its original and spontaneous course of movement. So you're not really letting the energy of Tao run through you. You're still providing a kind of a blockage due to your ego. So there's a commentary that was inserted. This is not by Suzuki. It wasn't in the original text, but to try to explain what this means. So meant here with the term nature, stand on top of basic matter and ride on that. Basic matter is amazingly tough. The trick is to make use of this natural toughness that everyone already has automatically built in. So use your natural energy rather than trying to consciously artificially create that energy. Balance so that you know it right perpendicularly below you instead of to the side. Stand on top of it, using it as a point like a pillar. Stand straight on a base. Now remember, this is being presented to people who are doing physical training. So it's not just a mental set of instructions, but the notion of balancing. So it applies to swordsmanship, also applies to something like martial arts, as we'll see at the end. So your mind and your body need to work together. Therefore, what is meant here by the term nature is not that one must do away with all learned technique. Instead, it means that the art technique that is used must make use of the natural, tough, basic point. One must, as it were, feel the pressure of the natural base upward throughout the pillar that is artfully balanced on top of it. So you have to feel it with your entire being, your physical being, as well as your mental being. So that's training of discipline in a non-dualistic way. No mind versus body going on. So all of the other cases, it's the mind trying to take control of the body when they should be acting as one. So this is the continuation of the analysis by the cat. To make nature display its mysterious way of achieving things is to do away with all of your own thinking. So those would be the thought coverings we've been talking about, for example, in the Heart Sutra. You're thinking, contriving, and acting. That's all part of the task-driven attention. Let nature have her own way. Let her act as it feels in you. So nature here is also Tao. And then there's a comment that's inserted. Let the external situation, so this is the stimulus-driven instructions here, plus the natural force of gravity control or guide your balancing actions of the pillar upon the base. Feel the balancing rather than think too hard of it consciously, like one does when riding a bike, walking on stilts, or balancing on the ball of one foot. So if you overthink it, then you're not able to behave naturally. You might remember the student comment when we talked about Chi Nul, where he compares Chi Nul's enlightenment followed by cultivation to the problem that a child has learning how to walk and the adult who doesn't have a conscious experience of walking, where it becomes natural. You don't have to think it through as you walk. Oops, what did I do? The technical, artful act of the balancing must be trained and familiarized until one can do it unconsciously, on feeling. So under these conditions, there's no shadows, no signs, no traces whereby you can be caught. You have then no foes who can successfully resist you. Okay. So the veteran cat represents conscious competence. She knows something particularly about that stimulus-driven attention that she's trying to share with them. There is one most essential consideration which, when neglected, is sure to upset everything. That is not to cherish even a speck of self-conscious thought. Because if you're thinking about yourself in the middle of that activity, then you are not really being completely active. And this is something that we find in people, particularly athletes at their peak. They're not conscious of their performance. For example, when they're out there getting their Olympic gold medal performance. Because if they're thinking about how they're performing, then that takes away from the performance itself. So when this is present in your mind, all your acts become self-willed, that is egocentric attention, human design tricks, and are not in conformity with the way, Tao. It is then that people refuse to yield to your approach and come to set up a psyche of antagonism on their part. So it's kind of like the fight or flight. You come at them with this dualistic energy and they fight back. That's what the rat did. When you are in a state of mind known as mindlessness, this is Mushin in Japanese, Wushin in Chinese, you act in unison with nature without resorting to all the artificial contrivances. The way, however, is above all limitations. And all this talk of mine is far from being exhaustive as far as the way is concerned. So I think this shows the conscious competence of the cat, the veteran cat, but she also understands the problem of language. So the talking about it is insufficient. She realizes that there is a limit even in her case. And that's when she brings in the true Zen virtuoso, who is the sleeping cat. So she doesn't present that cat, but she describes the cat to us. This is the one who doesn't even need to make use of words. People never saw her catch a single rat, but wherever she roamed, no cats ever dared to appear in her presence. So this is how you are the most effective in getting rid of the rat problem. You're so strong in this yin kind of way that rats don't even go into your territory. Comments on this or questions? Everybody get at least a sense of how this connects up with what we've been talking about in terms of Buddhist practice. If we focus on the problem of the ego self, that consciousness, which is artificial and superficial, as opposed to this centeredness that in Zen at least is talked about as the mind of no mind.
Professor, I have a question.
Mhm.
Okay, so when we were talking about the poems with the ox was symbolic for something. So in this, I don't know what the word is. This example, what is the rat significant for? Does it have some sort of symbolic nature? Like, what role does it play?
The story doesn't really indicate symbolism for the rat, but I think we could speculate about that. It's something that you want to accomplish, something that you are attached to. So in the case of the cats that fail, they are attached to the task of getting that rat. And because they are consciously driven, they have that tana, that thirst to get that rat, that interferes with their successful completion of the task. Because as we'll see with this true Zen virtuoso, the idea of killing the rat is not the best way to resolve the situation. So they're acting on the basis of violence, for one thing, and extermination of the rat. And as we saw with the veteran cat, she just walks in, has this yin energy that's pervading when she enters, and she just picks up the rat and takes it out because she's not intent on killing the rat. That's not her task. The task is to get rid of the rat, but that doesn't mean you have to kill the rat. And this is where we get to the true moral of the story, let's say, of the sleeping cat. That this cat doesn't even have to do anything in order to accomplish the task, because all she does is sleep. So let's see how that works. So this represents what we've been talking about, is the wisdom gone beyond. So the other cats were trained in skills. They knew the techniques. Some of them were thinking about the problem of mind and mind training. Okay, so those are all skill sets. But they don't have that wisdom gone beyond. And as we said, this wisdom gone beyond is also compassion. It's not necessary to kill the rat. It's not necessary to kill the opponent, as long as you remove the threat. So she's described as a cat who passed all her time in sleeping, showing no sign of spiritual animal power, looking like a wooden image. So people are going to be deceived by superficial appearances. People never saw her catch a rat, but wherever she roamed, no rats ever dared to appear in her presence. I once visited her and asked for the reason. She gave no answer. So she's like a real Zen master, you know, she's not giving any answers. I repeated my query 4 times, but she remained silent. It was not that she was unwilling to answer, but in truth, she did not know how to answer. So we note that one who knows speaks not a word, while one who speaks knows not. And this is a direct quote from the Tao Te Ching, Taoist text. So if you really know, you know enough to know that language cannot express what you know. The ones who speak the most are the ones who know the least. So that old cat was forgetful not only of herself, so that's a good thing, she's forgetful of her ego self, but all things about her. She is non-attached. She was in the highest spiritual state of purposelessness. And this purposelessness, which is actually traced back to Taoist philosophy, in a way is the complete rejection of task-driven attention. So she has no purpose. Her purpose is not to go out and kill rats. And yet she achieves the purpose by being purposeless. She was the one who realized divine warriorship and killed not. I am not to be compared with her. So that's why the veteran cat is consciously competent, but this cat is unconsciously competent. That's the highest level that you could reach. Divine warriorship that kills not. And this is actually something that we can find in a variety of texts. So, for example, what is the role of a warrior? Is it perpetuating conflict, violence, and destruction? Actually, some people's idea or stereotype of a warrior is that someone who is very violent. For example, in the Iliad, Achilles is basically a killing machine. Everybody thinks he's the greatest warrior of all time because he goes out there and he slaughters people. He has the sense that he can never be killed, except for the Achilles heel. Or is it the role of a warrior to set the stage for peace? For example, ending World War II, the United States implemented what is called the Marshall Plan that actually allowed Germany to recover. After the First World War, Germany was not allowed to recover and was forced to pay reparations to all the winning states. And that's what led to the Second World War, because they were like that furious rat with his back to the wall, and there was no option but to fight to the death in order to survive. And that's what Germany did in World War II. And so the Marshall Plan prevented that from happening again by giving them a chance to get back on their feet, particularly economically. So we can compare that to the role of a house cat. Is the function of a house cat to exterminate all rats, or just to remove them from human homes? And it looks like that's what the veteran cat did, just picked up the rat and took it out. And we also have to admit that rats do what they do to survive, and very often human beings create conditions that attract rats because they're not being careful. So they create the environment that is going to tempt the rats to come into their houses. So human beings are part of the problem, the rat infestation problem. So true warriorship is preventive. And we can look at two texts from Chinese culture, both of them associated with Taoism. I already mentioned the Tao Te Ching. Those who speak do not know, and those who know do not speak. It comes from that text. And this, from chapter 3 of that text, is very much like the sleeping cat. The cunning dare not act, that would be the rats. So act wu wei, so nothing will not be well governed. So these are instructions for how to be a good leader. Don't be assertive, don't try to push the envelope, but act in a natural way. Sun Tzu's Bing Fa, often referred to as the art of war, has a very similar kind of assessment. Numerous battles, numerous victories. This is not the highest form of skill. Not to fight, and yet to bend the opposing force to your will, this is the highest form of skill. So you can't tell a great warrior by body count, but by their ability to avoid having to fight at all. And Sun Tzu also talks about death. You don't want to have death on your side, and you also don't want to impose death even on the enemy. You want to save lives. So that sounds a lot like our sleeping cat. So the veteran cat kind of wraps it up with some nice philosophical commentary. So I think the last page is particularly important for our discussion. Swordsmanship is an art of realizing at a critical moment the reason of life and death. It is not meant just to defeat your opponent. A samurai ought to be always mindful of this fact and to discipline himself in a spiritual culture as well as in the technique of swordsmanship. So it was the technique that was overemphasized by the failed cats. First of all, therefore, he is to have an insight into the reason of life and death when his mind is free from thoughts of selfishness. It's not all about me and my being the greatest rat catcher of all time, like the black cat. This being attained, he cherishes no doubts, no distracting thoughts. He is not calculating, nor does he deliberate. His spirit is even and yielding and at peace with the surroundings. So that's yin energy, even and yielding, and then at peace with surroundings, that's stimulus-driven attention. He is serene and empty-minded, not task-driven. Thus, he is able to respond freely to changes taking place from moment to moment in his environment. He's responsive. On the other hand, when a thought or desire is stirred in his mind, it calls up a world of form. There is I, there is not I, and contradictions ensue. That's the dualistic mindset, self versus other. As long as this opposition continues, the way finds itself restricted and blocked. Its free activities become impossible. Your spirit is already pushed into the darkness of death, although losing its mysterious native brightness. So you already put yourself on the path to failure when the self, the I, the ego occupies your mind. So how can you expect in this state of mind to rise and wager your fate against the opponent? Even when you come out victorious, it is no more than accidental and decidedly against the spirit of swordsmanship. So you haven't really completed your training as a real swordsman. And here comes our purposelessness. Again, a rejection of the task-driven. Tao itself is said to be purposeless in the Tao Te Ching. By purposelessness is not meant mere absence of things where vacant nothingness prevails. So this gets into the problem of shunyata. The spirit is by nature formless, and no objects are to be harbored in it. So talking about the emptiness of all things. Form is emptiness, but emptiness is also form. When anything is harbored there, attachment, your psychic energy is drawn toward it. And when your psychic energy loses its balance, its native activity becomes cramped and no more flows with the stream. It should be fluid. Where the energy is tipped, there's too much of it in one direction, while in another there is shortage. Again, the inserted comment, this is the balancing of the pillar on its base. Where it is too much, if it overflows and cannot be controlled. Where there is shortage, it is not sufficiently nourished and shrivels up. I think you can see we're going towards the middle way here. There's got to be a middle way between these extremes, just like asceticism and hedonism. In both cases, it is unable to cope with ever-changing situations. That's impermanence. If you get stuck at one extreme or the other, then you're not able to deal with impermanence. But when there prevails a state of purposelessness, which is also a state of mindlessness, the spirit harbors nothing in it, nor is it tipped in any one direction. It transcends both subject and object, so non-dualistic. It responds empty-mindedly to environmental vicissitudes or problems and leaves no tracks. That was something that was said about the Pang family, that after they died, they left no tracks. We have in the Book of Changes, the I Ching, there is in it no thinking, no doing, or no willing, absolute quietness and no motion. But it feels, and when it acts, it flows through any objects and events in the world. When this is understood in connection with the art of swordsmanship, one is nearer to the way. So harmonizing with the energy of nature itself, so that it flows right through you. So this samurai has a question. So what is meant by there is neither the subject nor the object? So not only is the veteran cat teaching the other cats, but she's also teaching the samurai because he sees the connection to his own profession. So because of the self, there is the foe, she says. When there is no self, there is no foe. There's no dualism. There's no self versus other. The foe means an opposition, as the male is opposed to the female and fire to water, which will cancel each other out. Whatever things have form exists necessarily in opposition. When there are no signs of thought movement stirred in your mind, no conflicts of opposition take place there. When there are no conflicts, one trying to get the better of the other This is known as neither foe nor self. So what she's describing is that as a samurai, when you go into battle, you shouldn't look at it as a me versus you, winner versus loser. Because as soon as you have that dualistic conflict, you are already putting yourself at risk. When further the mind itself is forgotten, together with the signs, you enjoy a state of absolutely doing nothingness. That's Wu Wei she's talking about. You are in a state of perfect quiet passivity. I would prefer receptivity, but that's what it says, passivity. You are in harmony with the world. You are one with it. So this is something that is also discussed in psychological circles as flow. It's a form of basic meditation. When the foe form ceases to exist, you are not conscious of it, nor can it be said that you are altogether unconscious of it. So conscious, unconscious, those are again two extremes. Your mind is cleansed of all thought movements, and you act only when there is a prompting, the note adds, from the unconscious. Buddhism doesn't really talk about the unconscious, but many people do. So when your mind is thus in a state of absolutely doing nothingness, that is purposelessness, the world is identified with yourself, which means that you make no choice between right and wrong, like and dislike, and are above all forms of abstraction. Those forms of abstraction are those concepts, those thought coverings that we were warned about in the Heart Sutra. Such conditions as pleasure and pain, gain and loss, are creations of your own mind. The whole universe is indeed not to be sought after outside the mind. There is no mind outside the Lotus Sutra. Outside the Lotus Sutra, there is no mind. It kind of fits in here. An old poet says, when there is a particle of dust in your eye, the triple world becomes a narrow path. Have your mind completely free from objects, and how much this life expands. Hakuin, forget yourself and become the universe. When even a tiny particle of sand gets into the eye, you cannot keep it open. The eye may be likened to the mind, which by nature is brightly illuminating and free from objects. That would be the dharmas. But as soon as an object enters there, its virtue is lost. It is said again that when one is surrounded by an enemy, hundreds of thousands in strength, this form known as myself may be crushed to pieces. But the mind is mine, which no overwhelming army can have anything to do. Then quotes Confucius, even a plain man of the street cannot be deprived of his will. When, however, this mind is confused, it turns to be its own enemy. So we have to understand what our true identity is, not the identity that has been constructed by society and by assumptions and abstractions. So this is all I can explain here. For the master's task cannot go beyond transmitting technique and illustrating the reason for it. It is yourself who realizes the truth of it. The truth is self-attained. It is transmitted from mind to mind. It is a special transmission outside the spiritual teaching, the scriptural teaching. So that's quite consistent with what we've seen so far in Chan. There is here no willful deviation from traditional teaching, for even the master is powerless in this respect. Nor is this confined to the study of Zen. From the mind training initiated by the ancient sages down to various branches of art, self-realization is the keynote of them all, and it is transmitted from mind to mind, a special transmission outside the scriptural teaching. So all art forms, whether it's swordsmanship or garden design or poetry or pottery, they all have the same mind training. What is performed by scriptural teaching or the text is to point out for you what you have within yourself. There is no transference of secrets from master to disciple. Some people had claimed that there was a special teaching that the Buddha gave that created Chan, but he always denied that. Teaching is not difficult. Listening is not difficult either. But what is truly difficult is to be conscious of what you have in yourself and be able to use it as your own. Buddha wisdom, as it's mentioned in the Diamond Sutra, the Lotus Sutra. This self-realization is known as seeing into one's own being, which is Satori. Satori is sudden awakening. Satori is an awakening from a dream. Awakening and self-realization and seeing into one's own being, these are synonymous. So to be awake is the same to have a realization of your true identity, yourself, and also see one's own being, one's Buddha nature. Now we find some very similar comments from Bruce Lee, martial artist, who has a grounding in both Taoism and in Buddhism. So he's asked, what are your thoughts when facing an opponent? He says, there is no opponent. That's exactly what the cat said. Why is that? Well, because the word I does not exist. A good fight should be like a small play, but played seriously. That is a play acting. When the opponent expands, I contract, stimulus driven, responding to what the opponent is presenting. When he contracts, I expand. When there is an opportunity, I do not hit. It hits all by itself. So he's not conscious of telling his fist to hit. His mind and his body are working simultaneously. He doesn't have to be conscious of fist, now go hit. Any technique, however worthy and desirable, becomes a disease when the mind is obsessed with it. So that's what we see in the failed cats. Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive. That would be yang, but adjust to the object. That would be yin. And you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. He also says the highest technique is to have no technique. My technique is a result of your technique. My movement is a result of your movements. Classic stimulus driven. One should not respond to circumstance with artificial and wooden prearrangement. That's what especially the black cat was doing, going through all those cognitive sets that he had been trained to do. Your action should be like the immediacy of a shadow adapting to its moving object. It should be spontaneous. Your task is simply to complete the other half of the oneness spontaneously. That is the oneness between the object and its shadow. So a lot going on here. And the weekly commentary addresses the final observation of the veteran cat. Awakening and self-realization and seeing into one's own being are synonymous. So do you find this consistent with the message of Chinese Chan and Korean Sun Masters? And how would you describe the unique taste of Japanese Zen so far? So the next time we're going to have another chapter from the Zen source book about Hakuin. Also Zen, but no swordsmanship going on there. It's a different application of Zen. So we covered a lot here. We still have some time for questions. Anybody has any questions or comments? Seen a lot of different approaches in Chan in China. We've seen two very unique ways of addressing the same kind of teaching in Korea. And now here we are in Japan, and we have another cultural manifestation. Any questions? So when there's no questions, it means it's totally misunderstanding or you get it completely. Very rarely something in between. Anything?
For me, it makes sense. Oh, sorry. For me, it makes sense, but I feel like more reading into it is always helpful. But you were pretty clear. It's just I have to like, I guess, read more into it.
I think it's very helpful to have this kind of story after we've already looked at Buddhism in general, and particularly Chan Buddhism. And this is a different way of presenting the same message. And there's that nice mix of Taoism that's being introduced. But there's also something Japanese about it, I think. Buddhism becomes many things in many cultures, but still that underlying thread. That's what we're looking for. That's what I'm asking you about in the commentary there. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I'd still be happy to address that.